Welcome to No Script, No Problem on Believe, the #1 podcast network for professionals. Today I'm talking to executive producer Mary Robertson and director Arianna LaPenne about their Amazon Prime Video docuseries Glitter and Greed, the Lisa Frank story. But first, let's talk a little bit about the horrific wildfires that have devastated the city of Los Angeles, in particular the Pacific Palisades, Altadena, and Malibu. I live in Los Angeles, so it has been pretty horrible the past week here. I'm very fortunate in that I am safe. The part of town I live in has not been hit by the fires. However, several of my friends and former colleagues in the industry have lost their homes. Everyone who lives here at least knows someone who has lost everything. And while people are grief-stricken across town, I have seen many people who are coming together and rallying to volunteer and help rebuild and support each other, give food, give clothing, toys to little kids, money, you name it. I firmly believe LA will come back, but it's going to take a very long time. Wildfires have killed at least 24 people, left widespread destruction. Fires, sadly, are still going. They have destroyed more than 12,000 structures and scorched more than 60 square miles. Mandatory evacuations still are in place for more than 100,000 people. More than 15,000 brave firefighters, law enforcement officers, and other emergency personnel are battling the wildfires or working to support the crews who are, according to CAL FIRE. The firefighters and first responders are outstanding. They are incredibly brave, and they deserve all the support and accolades they are receiving. This is an unprecedented disaster. AccuWeather estimates more than $250 billion in damages and economic loss from the LA wildfires. That is more than the $225 to $250 billion that it was the estimate for damages after 2024's Hurricane Helene, and much more than the Maui wildfires in 2023. I cannot stress enough how powerful the winds were last Tuesday and Wednesday when this all started. Take a listen to this firefighter who talked to 60 Minutes.
The conditions that night were unbearable. It was a devil wind that came out. You know, that extreme Santa Ana wind condition. And the embers were being generated not only by the brush on the hillsides, but by the homes that are burning.
I have 4 friends who lost their homes in the Eaton fire, which is in the Altadena part of town. Altadena is filled with hardworking, everyday folks who bust their butts to work and make the shows and movies that you love. And they love their homes because getting a house in Los Angeles is a big deal. It's expensive to live here, and when you get a house, that's a huge investment and a huge moment. And that's why it kills me to see these folks who I have worked with closely, to see them lose everything. I know how hard they all worked to get those homes. And in the show notes, you will see a slew of links. Several are to GoFundMes from my friends. And if you have a little bit of extra money, please consider donating and helping them get back on their feet. Speaking of help, Disney and Warner Brothers Discovery are committing $15 million to wildfire relief funds, and Amazon, Netflix, and Comcast will add $10 million. Sony is going to chip in $5 million, and Paramount will contribute $1 million. A handful of folks, from back home or college friends have asked me, how did this happen? What caused this? Why now? It's only January. And the fact is, 2024 was the hottest year on record. And Southern California is extremely dry right now, with huge portions of the region having seen less than a quarter inch of rain in the last 8 months. The region's very dry start to winter comes after a summer marked by prolonged record-breaking heat that baked the landscape and cooked the trees and brush. National Weather Service gauge in downtown Los Angeles, which is a good indicator for rainfall in Southern California, has recorded only 0.29 inches of rain since May 1st, 2024. I don't want to get into the whole finger pointing and all of the blame game that is happening online, but one complaint is that in the Palisades, fire hydrants ran dry. Take a listen to this report from the Wall Street Journal, and they explain what the problem was.
Here's how the water supply system works and what we know about why hydrants ran out of water at the height of the Palisades fire. About 2/3 of LA County's water comes from sources outside of LA. And because LA is surrounded by mountains and hills, much of that water has to be pushed up to higher elevations.
Well, water is heavy, relatively speaking, and so it takes energy to pump it upstream.
Eric Porce, director of the California Institute for Water Resources, says you can think of the system sort of like a tree with interconnected branches. There are big trunk mains that move water from a source, like a water treatment plant or a reservoir, and carry it to smaller distribution mains, which split off from the trunk. From there, the water is moved through even smaller pipes or lateral lines that carry water to homes, businesses, and fire hydrants. In some areas, tanks and reservoirs are placed throughout the system to help maintain pressure, because pressure is what pushes water into all of the nodes. But during the LA wildfires, officials said intense demand overwhelmed the system, which drained several tanks and meant that there wasn't enough pressure to push water to hydrants up in the Palisades.
As for determining a cause for the Eaton fire, they are really starting to zero in on an inciting incident, and legal action is underway.
Altadena residents now suing Southern California Edison over the Eaton fire. This one has burned more than 7,000 buildings, including homes and schools and businesses. Lawsuit claims that fire was caused by SoCal Edison's power lines. However, Edison says they are not to blame.
Okay, you're probably tired of hearing me talk about the fires, but I got one more thing before we get to the interview with Mary and Arianna. I came across this great piece from NBC's Keith Morrison that really kind of encapsulated the resilience of Los Angeles, and so I wanted to share it with you guys.
What a crazy idea it is. What a bit of madness. This vast, sprawling city, collection of cities, on an earthquake-prone, drought-prone, fire-prone desert by the sea. What were we thinking? Even the water to drink, water to fight the fires, imported from somewhere else, like the people. And yes, it is glorious and inspired, and has given the whole world 100 years of drama and joy and laughter. Its names and faces known and loved and loathed by humans everywhere.
Can I help you load the chairs in?
And every once in a while, it is just impossible.
I'm trying to find my dad.
Which is how living in LA feels to a lot of people just now. Impossible and terrifying.
The flames are just kind of leaping right over us.
This one, many fires at once, is perhaps the worst of them. But there are so many, many stories in the history of this great benighted city. There has been so much loss.
Fire has jumped Mulholland at the crest of the Santa Monica. It's headed toward Bel Air.
Rare is the Angelino who remembers this one personally.
Fire crews
This was 1961, and it was Bel Air. This one destroyed 484 homes, chewed through 6,000 acres of prime real estate. Burt Lancaster's house burned down, and Joan Fontaine's and Zsa Zsa Gabor's and Dennis Hopper's.
I'm Tom Brokaw over Laguna Beach, California.
This is the one they call the Great Fire of '93. Took out a giant swath of Laguna. And there were more. There have always been more. One fire after another some years through the Santa Ana winds of winter so dry that pliant oak and chaparral shriveled to kindling, practically begged to be burned. How often have bits of Malibu gone down in flames to take multi-million-dollar mansions with them? Are we keeping track of the fires and the droughts and the floods and the earthquakes and the gridlock and housing prices that are clearly insane? And still we come here. Because there is something about Los Angeles, this siren of a city by the sea, that pulls us in and makes us stay even if we tell ourselves we probably shouldn't. Will it be different this time, now that it's worse, much worse? That Great Fire of '93 took out something like 700 houses. This time, 31 years later, more than 10,000 homes have been lost. We'll argue, of course, about mitigation practices, about what we should have done, and about climate change for sure. Is that what made this one so big, so bad? But here is an easy prediction. Though it will be very difficult, it will all be rebuilt. And most of us will stay. And more will come to this great mess of a city, even if, at the moment, it feels like the end of the world.
Okay, let's get to my interview with documentary filmmakers Mary Robertson and Arianna LePenne. Mary is making her second appearance on No Script, No Problem. She previously was here talking about her award-winning docuseries Quiet on Set. Mary is an Emmy award-winning executive producer and director. In 2022, she founded MAXINE Productions, a film and television production company devoted to the creation of extraordinary journalist and filmmaker-driven nonfiction work. This comes after running the New York Times Presents. Mary is an executive producer on the series we'll be discussing today, which is Glitter and Greed, the Lisa Frank story. Arianna LePenne is an Emmy-nominated and Edward R. Murrow award-winning filmmaker. Arianna's previous credits include Lost Women of Highway 20, which was a 3-part limited series she directed and produced for Max, and the Emmy-nominated Netflix docuseries Connected, The Hidden Science of Everything. Arianna directed Glitter and Greed, the Lisa Frank story for Amazon Prime Video. Glitter and Greed is a wild 4-part docuseries that penetrates the neon-hued world of Lisa Frank Inc., a brand that defined girlhood for a generation of Americans only to seemingly disappear overnight. Before we get to the interview, take a listen or a look, if you're on my YouTube, to a quick trailer so you guys kind of have an idea of what I'm talking about in the interview.
Lisa Frank's art have this nostalgia,
an explosion of color,
happy, magical, the cutest thing you've ever seen.
Lisa Frank's story started with a dream that grew into a phenomenon.
Rainbows, unicorns.
The art defined an entire generation, and she became known as the mastermind of an iconic brand.
At one point, they were making a reported $66 million a year.
But behind the colorful brand, things got very, very dark.
How can something that created so much happiness go so wrong?
There's a scary side to the Lisa Frank story.
Not everything was rainbows and unicorns.
Oh, it's a rainbow roller coaster, to say the very least.
It felt like management by fear. Walk around on eggshells.
They just took such advantage of us.
Who's going to survive till next week? Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
They say you should never meet your idols, and it's true.
All right, here's my interview with Mary and Arianna. Enjoy.
Mary Robertson, Arianna LePenne, welcome to No Script, No Problem.
Hi, Steve. Thank you for having us.
I love Glitter and Greed, the Lisa Frank story. And usually when I do one of these, I at least am familiar with the story before I've seen the documentary. I got to be honest, I had never heard of Lisa Frank. And I'm a Gen Xer. I knew about the stickers. I remember, seeing all the bright colors and everything, but I could not remember who she was. Talk to me a little bit about why you chose to do this documentary on Lisa Frank.
Like so many of us, I grew up completely obsessed with Lisa Frank products. So for those that don't know, these are products that are characterized by their really cheerful, bright designs. They often have unicorns or rainbows or dancing pandas or happy dolphins or psychedelic leopards on them. And they were enormously popular in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. As a kid, I remember walking down the aisle in the Ames department store that was full of Lisa Frank products and wanting every single one desperately. And I remember whenever I was able to acquire one, just the sparks of joy and delight that the product emitted, truly. And the products are less present than they were when I was a kid. And there was a bit of a mystery there, a question as to what had happened to the company and why. I have a production company, MAXINE Productions, and my colleagues and I shared the same fascination and obsession with the products, dug into and tried to answer that central mystery and question. Pretty soon came upon an article that had been written by the journalist Tracy Morrissey for Jezebel several years back, and it was called Inside the Rainbow Gulag. And it was an account of some of what had transpired inside of Lisa Frank Incorporated. And it featured the voices of many former employees who many of whom believed that what they experienced while working at Lisa Frank Incorporated was troubling and was distinctly different and almost opposite or in opposition to this really cheerful and colorful design world that they were, transmitting to children everywhere. And we started calling some of the former employees ourselves, and several of them would, upon receiving our phone call, say, "I've been waiting for someone to call. I'm dying to tell this story. It was, for me, it was the best of times. It was the worst of times. I have a wild story to tell." And you just quickly got the sense that you were tapping into some of folks' strongest memories from their entire lives, and that they were strong for a very important reason. And, I quickly came to believe that the story was resonant for me and would resonate for an audience because it was about these products that so many people felt such an intense attachment to, but also because it ultimately is about the plight of the creative professional and about our relationship to work and what work gives from you and what takes from you. So I reached out to our partners at Prime Video. They've been fantastic and passionate supporters of the project from day one. And then we knew we needed a really brilliant director. And I had been courting Arianna. We worked together years ago when Arianna was a DP. And I've been courting her ever since as a director. And I would bring her ideas and she'd go, "Okay, Mary, baby." And then when I called about Lisa Frank, she said, "Yes, let's do it."
Arianna, what attracted you to this project? What made you say yes when Mary asked you about it?
When Mary mentioned, "Oh, we're working on a possible project about Lisa Frank," it was like a record scratch moment for me. I was like, "Wait a minute, tell me more about the Lisa Frank project," because I just knew how visual it could be. And as she mentioned, I used to be a cinematographer first. That was how I made my living for at least 10 years before I moved full time into directing. And so every project I approach, I wanted to have a signature, a visual signature. And Lisa Frank brand, even like you said, you didn't remember the name, you've seen it. It is an iconic and unique aesthetic. It's the rainbow. It's got the neon effects. It's got this, when you see Lisa Frank, it's a look, right? And so I wanted to create a show for, in creating the show, I wanted to create a look for it that had, an homage to the brand, in a sense, worked into it. And so, when you watch the show, you'll see each character, each person is a color of this rainbow. And so when you see it all put together, you get the effect of, someone even said online, it's like watching a Lisa Frank folder on screen. And that was the idea. It's like you want to feel the experience of how it felt when you were a kid and you looked at those products.
Well, I really want to talk about the look because it's one of the first things you notice is, Arianna, I got to give you credit. A lot of times when you do a documentary, the last thing, you take so much time with the research and the characters and the story, and then you get to the interviews and you're like, okay, put a plant there. Just make sure that there's no painting in the background that we're going to have to clear. But you took so much care and concern with the colors. Each character, I couldn't wait till the next interview popped up to see what you were going to do with each one. And you remembered each character by their color. Can you tell me a little bit about developing those looks with your team, with Mary, and how you brought those interviews to life?
Yes. So we worked really long and hard on this. It was a very complicated math because everyone has to be a different color. It needs to speak to their personality. It needs to be a color that they relate to. I mean, I didn't just ask someone to be in a color. It was something everyone I asked people, what color do you love? What color represents you in some way? And so when I started to talk about the show, my very first thought was, this has to jump out at people. It has to grab your attention like a Lisa Frank folder did off the shelf. Again, like when you walked into the store, that stuff screamed out at you, right? It's super bright, it's super crazy, it's super wild. People have even said, like, looking at Lisa Frank art is like doing LSD. It has this like intensity, right? So I wanted the show to have an intensity of the visual look. And the thing I most wanted was for it not to look like boring, ordinary interviews in a documentary. And then yet, how do you do something that feels like Lisa Frank without it being, too over the top? You don't want to assault people visually. You don't want to give them a headache from looking at too much bright stuff. And so what we came up with is to do something, have everyone be a color, but have it be subtle enough that you don't even notice it at first. And then it starts to sink in like, oh, wow, everyone's their own color. We had to shoot in different rooms. Like when you shoot a documentary, a lot of times you'll just like shoot in a space where you can shoot multiple interviews back to back or something like that. And I thought, well, why do that when we'll get Airbnbs with different colored walls, and then we'll have them bring their own art, their own possessions, and their own clothes, but in the color scheme of their color, right? So like Tony, he's got this sort of turquoise background, and I had him bring one of his shirts. Just so happened that he had this sort of cream and turquoise shirt, and then his paintings are hanging in the background, and his paintings have this 50s aesthetic of like 50s cars with actually red and some turquoise in them. And so every room is like one main color and then a complementary color. Like the turquoise room has little accents of red, the yellow has little accents of green, the purple has a little, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This complicated math was executed with the great work of my DP, our DP Victor Tadashi Suarez, and a production designer Chloe Resin. And gosh, we really she really bent over backward to kind of bring these looks to life. But the thing that made the work the hardest part of it was it still needed to speak to those people and be realistic to them and be authentic to them. So what you're seeing is their actual, personality on screen in each of those frames.
The other thing that's very unique about this is the graphics, the animation, the recreations, because the three of us all know that can get really pricey if you go down a certain path. Tell me a little bit about how you guys developed that look, the decisions that you made.
We have great partners in the motion graphics design company, Big Star. They're friends, they're partners of ours over the course of many projects. And it was important to us to bring them into this project at the onset. So they were involved in our creative planning from day one. We didn't wait until the edit had begun, and they were kept abreast of the developing interview look. It felt as though moving towards what we might call animation was important in this case, and motivated. Important because there's a paucity of archival material from within Lisa Frank Incorporated within the four walls. There's we have beautiful archive from personal archive. We have wonderful archive from James Green, Lisa's ex-husband and ex-business partner. But, people don't often take pictures of themselves at their desks. And certainly they don't take pictures of themselves feeling sad at their desks, for example. So we knew that there was a vacuum to fill visually in that regard. And then, of course, this is subject matter that's about, this concerns design, this concerns illustration. So it felt completely motivated to embrace design and illustration to fill this vacuum. And then once we had committed, Amazon Prime Video completely embraced this choice at the onset too. We had to make decisions about how to allocate resources and embracing this part of the process early on. And they were our complete partners in this. And I'm so grateful that they took the risk on this. And I think it is a bold, formal choice. And then once we're in the world of building the animation cells themselves, we're very mindful that, we are journalists in addition to being filmmakers, and we place, accuracy is our most important value, right? We need to make our films in an ethical manner, and we need to be driven by a need and desire to create and propagate the truth. We had to, with the animation, both find a way to be expressive and imaginative without, I guess, bringing in unnecessary exaggeration, if that makes sense. And Arianna worked really closely with the designers at Big Star to fine tune every little detail in those cells.
Because we had to get the period. It's a period piece. We had to get the period right, right? So like what Lisa's wearing, it's not only needs to be the right period, it needs to be the kind of things that she was wearing, and sometimes actually the things that she was wearing. And James, we had to, people are describing, what did he look like? What did he dress like? Right. So it needs to be right. And all of that, the style of the animation is cut out. So it's from stock imagery and actual archive. So it's this composite of both of those factors. But, like I would be sending the designer Carol Kai, who's amazing, one of the leads on the animation. I would be sending her like movie references, and okay, so like when the collared shirt, it needs to be like this, and the slacks, those slacks are too narrow. It needs to be like the 80s style slacks, like and then it goes through time, 80s, 90s, 2000s. So the fashion is changing too in the animation, and so it was a huge undertaking. And kudos to Big Star for totally.
Yes. So, Mary, I'm noticing kind of a trend here with a lot of your projects. The last time we talked, it was quiet on set, looking back at Nickelodeon. You just did Girls Gone Wild, looking back at Joe Francis and what he did. Now, this is, like you said, it's a period piece, Arianna. So tell me a little bit about why it's important. Kind of look back at these rise and falls, these kind of companies or these people who are able to grab our attention, grab success, but maybe not do it in the most ethical way. Why is that important? Why are those stories important to tell?
Great question. I'm always, broadly speaking, interested in work which scrutinizes power. I wouldn't necessarily go so far to say as we're always aiming to or able to hold power to account, but I'm interested in work that scrutinizes power dynamics. We happen to be and those can be power dynamics at play in workplace environments or other spheres. I think we're at a particularly opportune moment to scrutinize power dynamics and reframe events from our recent past, right? And I think that one of the reasons why we're at an opportune moment is because if you are someone who wasn't the most powerful person in the room 20 years ago, and you couldn't tell your story about Dan Schneider or Joe Francis or Lisa Frank or James Green because you were afraid for your job, well, 20 years later, you might not be in that same dynamic, and you might be at liberty to speak more expressively about your experience without worry about the consequence that may or may not have on your present or future employment. So we're able to engage with people at a moment when they're able to speak their truth more fully. And I think also when audiences are sensitive to it and attuned to it. And that's a lovely opportunity to be able to offer people to say, you weren't able to share your story 20, 30 years ago. Now we're able to take this story that had previously been pushed into the shadows and really pull it out into the light. And we're able to do that in a moment when we think, chances are that the audience is going to meet that with sensitivity, with compassion, with understanding. And maybe it was going to be too complicated 20 years ago. Maybe that wasn't going to be the case. And once you're in the position where, individuals feel comfortable sharing the accounts and the truths and the stories that they didn't have the space or power to share previously, then you're in a place where you can oftentimes reframe what people believed as a received truth. And sometimes that's a narrative about Dan Schneider. Sometimes that's a narrative about a Nickelodeon production. Sometimes that's a narrative about Girls Gone Wild or Joe Francis or Lisa Frank Incorporated, right? But I think we are at a powerful moment. We have a unique opportunity to revisit and reframe and excavate a lot of narratives and truths from 20, 30 years ago.
Arianna, the best characters in a documentary, right, are the ones who are complex and the ones who you're able to kind of get inside their heads and find those little intricacies, those peccadillos. James Green, he was like that perfect character in a documentary. How were you able to get him to open up so much and get him to really show you all of his warts as well as his sensitivity?
I'm like genuinely with the person I'm with in that moment. I kind of think everybody's interesting. It's just not always for the same reasons they think they're interesting, right? So I am genuinely interested in James. I'm genuinely interested in all the people that I talk to. And it's just like the deeper you go with somebody, the more you grow to appreciate these different, like, complicated layers of their personality. And, I think most people in everyday life, they're constantly thinking like, do I like this person? Do I want to spend time with them? In terms of your everyday interactions, right? That's not what I'm doing. I'm investigating and being curious about the people that I'm meeting in the space of the documentary. It's not about whether I like them or not. It's about like bringing them to life, bringing to life these like personality traits and like that is people are fascinating. And if you kind of let them do their thing, they keep coming out. Right. So like in terms of brass tacks, like, yeah, I spent a lot of time talking to him, a lot of time off camera talking to him, a lot of long phone calls, Yeah, he's a complicated person, but I kind of get him at the same time. Like, being totally honest, he's a lot like my father. So I've got like 30, 40 years of experience, So, and like I said from the beginning, like I kind of want to know everybody's story. I don't care whether it's good, bad, or it's sort of like a no judgment thing. It's not about me deciding what I think of them. It's about putting them on screen and letting other people decide. It's almost like therapist talk when they're like, no judgment. I'm not going to decide what I don't need to decide. I'm just like here to kind of put a camera on you and let other people decide what they think.
I want to talk about a couple of themes that I picked up on. One was kind of the control of, the artist's work, which I find is really, it was important to the folks who worked for Lisa Frank and James Green. And now it's kind of coming back. Like, I mean, it's always been important to artists, but really I find it relevant today as you find actors and writers fighting for their rights with AI coming into play. And, even with Spotify taking, so much from musicians. Talk to me a little bit about that, what you got out of your interviews from these people who were giving up so much to Lisa Frank with all of their art.
Yeah, a lot of the folks that we interviewed for the film, for the series, they often, many of them at various times felt as though they should quit, but they didn't feel as though there was another option to make art in Tucson at the time, right? There were no other jobs where they could be a working artist, and on balance, they would routinely decide to continue to stay, even though they had their qualms, misgivings, complaints, issues with the working environment. And that's a sacrifice and a trade-off that many of us are familiar with. At the same time, they feel decades later, they feel so much pride in what they were able to create or contribute to creating. And, they have the source material from when they were working there. They have these drawings stashed away. They have journals that they kept during the time. And I think they're right to take great pride in that work because it does endure. I don't know if we can go so far as to say it's eternal, but I think that that work will live on for decades and decades. And anecdotally, I can share that my 6-year-old daughter loves it as much as I did. That's really powerful to have been part of making something that holds appeal for decades.
The other thing I picked up on, was that power dynamic in the workplace, right? That Lisa Frank kind of hovered over everybody, and then James comes in as the president. He hovers over everybody and issues this big mandate that they all talked about. And that obviously today is very prominent. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you guys kind of laid that out as something that was very important to the story?
You always got to work for somebody, I'm thinking of it like a blues song. You're always working for the man is kind of the vibe. It's like a very American story. I feel like this story is a very American story because in other countries, right, you have kings and queens, and in America we don't have that, but we do have kind of we definitely have a 1% situation here where there's the 1% who have many, and then there's this huge middle class that is constantly in debate in our society is whether the the voices of the many should have more power than the voices of the 1%. So again, I think there's all of these layers to this story that everyday Americans really relate to. Another part of this story that people can relate to is this was a small business that just like made it big. It was like a mom and pop operation, a husband and wife who ran it and kind of struck gold. And it wasn't just luck. They had a great idea, great concept, and great products and great art. But what happens when you suddenly get really successful and you have a lot of people working for you, but you want to keep that success? At what cost, right? And so that's a big part of what we're exploring in the story.
The one person who I'm sure you wanted to talk to, Lisa Frank, does not sit down. How tough was it to tell that story without her POV? And how close were you to getting Lisa to actually talk to you?
We approached Lisa at the beginning, middle, and end of the film many times, and hoped until the very last day that we locked picture that we would be able to film her on camera to interview with her. She declined to participate. She offered a statement that we include at the end of each episode. Getting incredibly close to the story is obviously important, featuring primary accounts. And we're able to feature so many in this project. We're able to feature the account of James Green, who is her ex-husband, ex-business partner. We're able to feature the account of one of her children and of many, many former employees who gave so much to the company and were so directly involved with the day-to-day comings and goings. So we've totally achieved that primacy. And in the case of James and Hunter, this son, they have never before shared their accounts. I'll never forget when we wrote James asking if he'd be interested in interviewing, and he wrote an email back saying, "I am the real Lisa Frank." And it was in all caps and there were multiple exclamation points. And we completely knew at that moment that he had a story that he was so passionate about. And we knew that he hadn't shared it before. And he was is deeply interested and invested in changing what he thinks is a dominant narrative. So he thinks the dominant narrative is that Lisa Frank, the person, created all of this beautiful work that Lisa Frank, the company, was associated with, attached its name to, and he wants it known that he played a really, 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 really large role in it. That's his account, and it's very important to him to have that in the public record. And of course, then there's so much more, there's so much more intensity to the story. Lisa and James were involved in an incredibly acrimonious divorce and battle over control over the company. I think, oftentimes divorces are very acrimonious, but this was particularly so, and it played out. There were accusations that were lobbed back and forth. And if you lived in Tucson at the time, you would have been well aware of the ups and downs of that legal battle. And, I think it was quite heartbreaking for those involved. And that's a big part of what comes to light in the film too.
And Mary, you touched on something that I found very, very true in terms of these people clearly loved the fact that they had achieved something and were a part of something so great. Like that, it's very rare that you find that you're a part of, whether it's in our business, like a TV show or a film that does so well. They were part of, an empire. And yet I found, that there was this bittersweet kind of heartbreaking sense of, but it all kind of fell apart. Arianna, in your dealings with the former employees or, the folks you talk to, kind of what is the sense in Tucson about Lisa Frank, the brand now? How do people feel about what has happened there and where it's headed, where the company is headed?
I think people are still fascinated by it. And there's always rumor on the street, kind of like, and whenever are they reopening? Oh, they posted something on social media saying we're back, or they did a little like advertisement with some of the animal characters in front of the building, like doing a dance, and they'll cover it on the local Arizona news. Like there's pride locally and fascination, curiosity. There's dark curiosity too. Like people have heard the stories. There is the lore. There's the mythology. And so it's kind of this, it has this power over the community. Like I think people want to see it to come back. And certainly the artists who work there, like Patty says at the end, she says, we poured our heart and soul into those little guys. And she's talking about the characters, the animals. She's calling them those little guys. And I just want to see them live on forever. That's what she says. Because, reading the letters from kids about how much they loved the characters and loved the stuff, it's like Josh says, one of the illustrators, it makes you just want to do a cartwheel and a double flip down the Walmart aisle when you see your stuff on the aisles. It's just like the greatest feeling in the world as an artist or a maker of anything. When you see someone love something you've made, it's like it makes it all worth it. I took my daughter to see Aladdin the night before last, and we met Princess Jasmine outside, and my daughter said, "This is the greatest day of my life." And she said, that makes it all worth it. As an actor, as a performer, as an artist, it makes it all worth it when somebody loves what you do.
Everybody needs to watch Glitter and Greed, the Lisa Frank story. It's on Amazon Prime Video. Arianna, Mary, thank you so much for joining me on No Script, No Problem.
Thanks for the great conversation. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks to Mary and Arianna for chatting with me, and congratulations on the docuseries. Mary's MAXINE Productions has another project coming up in a couple weeks on Max about the rise and fall of Diddy, so make sure you check that out. A reminder, please look at the show notes for links to donate to folks affected by the Los Angeles wildfires. And if you're looking for something to watch, check out Black Box Diaries. It is a fantastic, intimate, and incredibly powerful documentary from Shiori Ito that you can watch on Paramount Plus. She's a young filmmaker who went through hell to get the film made and to find justice. And in the process, she started a movement in Japan. That's going to do it for another episode of No Script, No Problem. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe, download, and rate it with 5 stars. It's available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Podcast, Stitcher, and TuneIn. You can also find it at Believe.com and at Believe Podcasts. Follow me on Blue Sky, Instagram, LinkedIn, Mastodon, Snapchat, Threads, or Facebook. You can also send me questions at noscriptnoproblempodcast@gmail.com. If you're interested in advertising on the show, please contact Believe at Believe.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, I'm Steve Berkowitz for No Script, No Problem.